21 minutes after the 6 o'clock hour on this Tuesday. Let's get into the discussions immediately. This is a very, I would say, hot topic. Many are trying to make sense and work out the maths, as it will, concerning the PDP resignations. A massive resignation. I mean, in much better times, this would have been the launch there in Barataria. And you're seeing Farley there on the campaign trail, everybody in their black, all smiles, waving their flags. It was a good time. It was a good moment. It was such a breath of fresh air, as it will, in the political space. I mean, it was a two-party system for a long time. I mean, others would have propped up, obviously, over the years. But PDP seemed to be really gaining some ground. They would have captured Tobago, and they were making some headway, or at least trying to make some headway in Trinidad. And we are looking now at, again, just some of the, I would say, the good old days, you know, in better times. All right, everybody in their black and all fancy dung weaving. Yes, it was a nice moment, Martin. You know, it was a nice moment. It was, many looked at this as, you know what, change can come. And obviously now, not even 2 years after, we are seeing a debacle, as it were. You know, PDP, at least some of the formative and the more, I would say, well, senior members, because obviously the main man is still in the mix and he stands alone. I'm just trying to make sense of what's happening, Martin. As always, great to see you. Compliments of the season. Thanks for coming on. Let's make sense of this.
Thanks a lot to you, Jason. Same to you, Jason, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Martin, I mean, Frank, to be frank, what's going on? Where do we go from here? What's the current situation here?
Well, the thing is, you have in one corner whom I would refer to as now basically seen as the Duke of Hazard. You have Mr. Watson Duke. He is on his own, it would appear. I mean, of course, one must never count him out because he's a fighter, he's a street fighter, he's you know, a man on the ground, and of course, he always has his resources that he can draw upon to you know, mount a comeback. But I mean, it seems clear that the team that Farley has with him in power in the assembly, it looks like Farley does have the whip hand, and he has them under control and, you know, towing the line, and they've all basically, I guess, pledged their allegiance to him in one form or another, because, I mean, he has them all together, and they've all signed on to this, and they've all submitted these resignations en masse. So, I mean, there are two aspects to this matter, primarily, Jason. There would be the legal aspect, and then, of course, there is, I guess, I mean, maybe it's not something that politicians like to speak about, but there would also be a moral, ethical dilemma that one has to confront, if you understand me, because, you know, there are some persons who are already saying, you know, and I mean, this is just the average, you know, man on the street saying that, look, hey, if it is that we voted in the PDP as a party, as an entity, is it fair, is it right to now have independents representing the interests of the persons who voted for candidates on a PDP slate?
Yeah, and that's the part I'm trying to work out, because I know when it comes to
one aspect of it.
I know when it comes to the Red House and the corridor of influence and power in that regard, unless you are appointed on a recommendation by, I would imagine, the PM, obviously, you get a recommendation, you go forward to the president, and they will now appoint, they will have their independent senators, right, who will have no particular allegiance to any particular party. Everybody else, obviously, would now have to use a political party as a vehicle.
As your vehicle,
to get in now to this particular space, which obviously would have been done in Tobago, right? So PDP would have been the vehicle, and now they are out of the vehicle, but still in the corridors. I'm trying to just work out the maths. They could have come out of the vehicle. All 16 come out of the maths, yeah?
They're out of the vehicle, but they're operating it by remote control. So they're still in control of it, if you understand me. And that's the interesting conundrum that we face here. Because unlike the National Parliament, where in 1978, we amended our constitution to create what was referred as the crossing the floor provisions, which basically said, look, if you are elected by a political party and you come into office as a member of parliament through this political party, if you resign or you're expelled from that party, then obviously you have to give up your seat and a by-election is called. That provision is clear. There's no doubt about that. It's set out in section 49(2)(e) of the Constitution. The THA Act, however, has no similar provision. So it begs the question, Jason, have we decided deliberately to leave that section out of the THA, Assembly Act, or was it left out inadvertently or in error? And then if it was left out inadvertently or in error, the question then arises, does section 92 of the standing orders of the THA come into play? In other words, Section 92 of the standing orders of the THA, it speaks to this. It says, in any matter not herein provided for, resort shall be had to the usage and practice of the House of Representatives of Trinidad and Tobago, which shall be followed as far as the same may be applicable to the Assembly, and not inconsistent with these standing orders, nor with the practice of this Assembly. So, is it that you can say, well, look, since the THA Act doesn't speak to this issue of crossing the floor or leaving your political party, can we use Section 92 of the standing orders as a means of invoking the usage and practice of the House of Representatives? So the usage and practice of the House of Representatives, as I've said, is guided by Section 49(2)(e) of the Constitution, which says, if you leave your political party or you are expelled from it, and that's the political party through which you came into the House of Representatives, you must vacate your seat. So it's very interesting. And I mean, I think that aspect of it can only be decided by some sort of judicial interpretation, Jason, because it's not going to be something that, we could sit here, and be armchair, constitutional experts and decide. I think it's only a judicial determination will resolve that. If it is someone seeks to mount a challenge, and one would imagine that Mr. Watson Duke is probably weighing his options in that regard.
So let me ask.
But the fact of the matter is, on the face of it, it appears that Mr. Farley Augustine and his entire team are allowed to continue in office as independents.
So let me ask, is Mr. Duke's request for a fresh election far-fetched?
Well, it would only be if a court determines that they must vacate their seats. If a court doesn't determine that, then it just comes down to the question of a moral and ethical imperative, whether they would feel morally bound to say, well, look, hey, it's not fair for me to be in power based upon the fact that I came into power on a PDP ticket and I am now an independent. But I mean, of course, former Prime Minister Basdeo Pandey made it quite clear, and I think his words will stand the test of time when he said politics has a morality of its own. So I'm not sure that that moral imperative is necessarily something that is going to have any great, tremendous sway at the end of the day.
Martin, let me ask you to take off the legal hat for a moment and put on the business chamber hat now for me. How does the business community, or at least the early conversations you would have had yesterday, and I'm sure you'll have some more today, how does the business community in Tobago feel about the current political, I would say, instability?
Well, any sort of political instability is never good for business, Jason. Never, ever good for business, because it means that, persons start hedging their bets, people start being more cautious in terms of either expenditure or even payments. And, the thing is, a lot of businesses do business with the Tobago House of Assembly or with central government. So once you have this type of, scenario, then you have basically a slowdown in economic activity. And, the interesting thing is we will now beginning to see a nice uptick in movement and, coming off of the carnival, looking forward to Christmas, which is another good season that, we look forward to here in Tobago, because you have lots of visitors who come across, lots of Trinidadians. They have a nice tradition of spending Christmas or maybe Whole Year's, New Year's in Tobago. So, those things are things that we are looking forward to, but the overall picture is not good once you have this type of political instability. And of course, you have persons who are already echoing Mr. Duke's call and saying, look, there should be fresh elections, which again is another, bit of an upheaval in your business climate. So, from that perspective, it's not the best thing at all. And one would have hoped that at least they would have been able to serve out the 4 years without this type of, major imbroglio. But the reality is that 1 year into office, you have basically, the gloves are off. I can't see the possibility of any rapprochement between these two titans. This is really just a clash of the giants.
And as we wrap things up, does this empower all those other political parties in this space? Obviously, the main one would have been PNM, who was, well, they were given that mandate to step aside for PDP now to control the wheel. Obviously, there's the massive resignation now, but there are other major players on the ground in Tobago. Many parties, I remember, would have put forward their mandate for the sister island. Does this give them now a chance to regroup, re-energize, recalibrate, and tell Tobago, well, we told you so?
Well, the thing is, I would imagine that, coming out of this, the only logical conclusion one could see is that Mr. Farley Augustine and his team will be launching their own political vehicle. Because in Trinidad and Tobago, the nature of our politics is that you don't really survive very long as an independent politician in representative politics. We have a tradition of party politics. So I would imagine that sooner or later, you are going to see them launch their own political vehicle. The challenge with that is once you have the trifurcate splitting of votes. In other words, you have the PNM, you have the PDP, and whatever the new party Mr. Augustine and his supporters would be forming, then of course, I think it leaves possibly the PNM in a very comfortable position in the sense that if it is that basically those PDP former votes are now going to be split in two if one looks at the results. And I'm just using this just from a purely statistical point of view. I am making no comment whatsoever on the political chances one way or the other, but just statistically, if one looks at the results of the last election and you look at the margins of victory, they were not that significant to suggest that if there's a split down the middle in that support which voted against the PNM, that they are necessarily going to triumph again. It actually more looks in favor of the PNM that once those votes are split that way, that the PNM would most likely emerge victorious. And as I say, this is just a statistical analysis. It's not a political commentary. It's not a political prediction.
Understood.
So I don't want anybody to, think, I'm at all venturing into that area. It's just looking at the figures, the numbers, and the facts of how the voting pattern was in the last election.
Of course, Martin, and we fully understand. Speaking about PNM, after the break, we will have that discussion concerning the PNM internal elections. Martin, I want to tell you many thanks, compliments of the season if we don't get a chance to touch base before 2023.
Thank you, same to you.
And thanks for coming on this morning.
The very best to you and your team.
That's right. So the incumbent, Dr. Keith Rowley, remains political leader of the PNM, and his challenger, Karen Nunes Teixeira, will join me on the Zoom line to do the post-mortem, as it were, of the PNM internal elections, and for her to really elaborate some more on her leading story here on page 5 inside today's Guardian. Get your copy and give that particular article a read. Very interesting developments there. Karen Nunes Teixeira, she's up next.